I think that's like a cute start, probably.
Just a few more minutes, or just 1 minute for those of us at the back. If you want to have a seat, we'll be glad to have you settled. Okay.
Salam, salam, salam. Marhaban bikum. Son duada. Ekabo. Sonungu dozua. Ekwaba. Karibu. Welcome.
Welcome from wherever you've joined us tonight. We say welcome to you. Welcome to a celebration of the tenacity of the African spirit. Welcome to a night of joy, a night of fun, and a night of laughter. Welcome to a recognition of the significance of the beauty of our continent to the world. Welcome, brothers, sisters, and friends of the continent. Welcome to a celebration of World Africa Day. Welcome to Ubuntu Cafe 2023. Come on, put your hands together. Put your hands together and make some noise. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Chris. I'm from Nigeria.
And my name is Kolata. I'm from Eritrea. So, Ubuntu, I am because we are. Today, this is our second Ubuntu Cafe, organized by Program for Africa Leadership, which is a special program, extracurricular program for all of us from African countries. So, people are in the house, make it noise! Yes, thank you. People is part of also like LSC, Firoz Lalji Institute for Africa, which is a part of an LSC focused mainly on putting Africa at the center of debates on global issues. So Chris, can you tell us what is the program for tonight?
What is the program for tonight? Who wants to know?
Yes.
Okay, we have wonderful events lined up for you this evening. We're going to be starting off with the book launch of How Africa Trades, written by Professor David Luke. And we're going to be having a wonderful fireside chat discussion. He's going to be telling us all of the interesting things about trade and development in Africa. And after that, we're going to have a little icebreaker. We're going to get to know each other a little bit more. Some people that you haven't spoken to, we'll get to mix that up a bit, have a poetry performance. And then we move to the next section, which is a part of this event I'm looking forward to, the debate. Trust me, we have our debaters ready, Oxford style, opening propositions, rebuttals, and they're going to be talking about the African Continental Trade Agreement and what it implies for Africa. And we have external experts who will be here to help us do that. And after that, we're going to move on to a special segment, which is the fashion show. We have a beauty queen in the house, right? Ooh. And she's going to be helping us, do some fashion discourse based on all of the beautiful attires and appearances we have this evening. And when we're done with that, we have a couple more performances, a special message from the AU to commemorate this day, and then we move into the fun part, which is the after party. A lot of music, a lot of food, a lot of discussions, and just networking and having fun tonight. So please, if you came here serious, relax, okay? Tell somebody relax. With a smile. Just tell them relax. It's a night of fun, okay? It's not so serious. Some faces look so, just relax, smile. It's going to be fun, and we have so much lined up for you this evening.
Exactly. We're going to have a lot of fun, so be ready for that, okay? We just need all the vibe and the mood for that. So let's start with our first opening session, which is a book launch, featuring the book launch of How Africa Trades, edited by Professor David Luke and published by LSE Press. If you want to see it now, that's on that side. Please don't forget to give it a look. The panel is going to be chaired by Professor Ken Chapman, Professor for Development Studies in the Department of International Development at LSE. Professor Ken is Professor of Development, and he works on the comparative and international political economy for development, with a focus on understanding variation in national policy responses to changing and global rules. Professor Ken has also a book called Coalitions and Compliance, The Political Economy of Pharmaceutical Patents in Latin America. Please join me to welcome Professor Ken Chapman. Thank you.
Wow, great. Hello, yeah, thanks for the introduction, and thanks for having me. It's a real honor, pleasure to be here. Let's see if this mic's working. So this is great. We're going to launch David and his colleagues' book, How Africa Trades. We have Brian Kogo from the WTO, who's also going to talk with us. This is not, like your formal academic style thing with presentation. There's no PowerPoints or anything. We're just going to have a chat among the three of us. I think we have roughly an hour or so. Let me just briefly introduce David and Bright. I think most people probably know them or of them. I could spend the whole hour just reading through their bios. But David is a professor of practice here at LSE. And the strategic director of the Firoz Institute for Africa. He has a lot of experience in international organizations, particularly the United Nations, on trade and trade and development issues. And he's an alum of LSE. And Bright, who's also an alum of LSE, so we have two of them. Am I all right? Yeah. Bright and I were just chatting. He was at LSE in the late, well, I don't want to say when he was here because then you'll know his age. But when he was at LSE, it was a very different place in terms of the buildings. And then he has a long, extensive career in international organizations, including the African Development Bank, OPEC, the International Monetary Fund, and he also had a stint in the Ministry of Finance of the Nigerian government. So why don't David and Bright come to the stage, and we're going to have a chat. I think, oh yeah, we have mics. Can I move this podium so, can we move the podium so if I'm in the middle I can see, thanks. Can I? Yeah, good. All right. Okay, well, this is nicer. So I just want to point out that one of my students, I have a number of my students in the audience. There's one who basically only can talk about Nebraska in there. So if any of your comments, if any of your answers to my questions can bring in the state of Nebraska, you'll make one person hear it out.
It's a great place.
Yeah. No, so I want to start off with a question for David. First of all, I want to congratulate David and co-authors on such a great book. The chapters are full of super interesting insights, and they really tackle a key important set of issues about Africa's integration into the global economy and how the patterns of trade, both within the continent, so intra-African trade, but also the way different sets of African countries in different regions of the continent trade with the outside world and participate in international organizations having to do with trade. It's also great to have Bright here from the WTO. So let me just start with a question for David, which I want to put you on the spot and ask you, I think, is the hardest question first to get it going, which is that all I hear about these days is sort of local production and regional production, whether it's about, machines, whether it's about pharmaceutical products, whatever it is, it's all about local production, increasing the manufacturing base on the continent. And I want to know how African countries overcome the conflicts over, where is the local production? Because you don't need the same things produced in 40-odd countries. And so, and everybody wants things produced in their own country. So, to start off the conversation, I'd like to get your sense of how, if we could bring Bright in as well on this, how African countries can deal with and hopefully overcome the tensions between what sounds good, local production, and the fact that everybody wants to be the one that does it.
Sure. Very loaded question, Ken. But in a sense, this is what we try to answer in the book as well. We did this in two ways. Firstly, we looked, of course, at Africa's external trade, which is highly concentrated in commodities. And looked at Africa's internal trade, which is much more diversified. And also, of course, we looked at the data, because the book is very data-driven. Looked at the data that tells us that inter-African trade relatively small, but highly diversified. Now, when it comes to local production, regional production, I think that dichotomy falls apart because production is, nowadays you can say it's trade in tasks, trade in value chains, trade in supply chains, and so on. And what also we found is that because intra-African trade is more diversified, that the African countries, small, still small, relatively small portion of their trade, but nonetheless is better integrated through the supply chains. Now the problem is that the borders, what we would say, are thick, in the sense that a lot of bureaucracy and borders, customs inefficient, that sort of thing. So that whole agenda for trade facilitation, reform, also bringing down tariffs, some of them are arbitrary, not having clear rules and so on. So you had a scenario where you have trade in value-added goods and supply chains. Borders not operating effectively, tariffs relatively high, a lot of arbitrary decisions and so on. So what do you do about that? And the answer to that, of course, in the African continent has been the African Continental Free Trade Area. That has been the answer, and I'm sure you will come to this. But basically, that is a strategy that the African countries have adopted that would enable them to engage in production through these value chains, because it's not just anymore one country doing everything. It's one country making an input to the other, and so on and so forth. And you can see how this is emerging, whether it's automobiles in South Africa, you see Botswana and Lesotho a part of that value chain, or if it is cement or Dangote in West Africa, you see different countries being part of that value chain. So the answer to that again is yes, one country cannot produce everything, but if they can open up the markets, deal with the bureaucracy and the borders, implement this deal that they have signed and that they're working on, the FCFTA, then you can begin to see a much more integrated, productive production going on in the country. So basically, that's what I'll say is the answer to that question. Really, it's no longer one country producing everything, regional versus local. Globally, and I'll just end this way, of course, geopolitical tensions are beginning to make this interdependence through value chains more problematic, and we're seeing this. I don't want to get into the details, we will be able to come back to this. But all the same, I think no one is doubting that supply chains have become so integrated that we do need to have some way of cooperating among countries for these supply chains to work. So let me stop here.
That's great, thanks. Can I bring right in? Do you have anything you want to say on this?
Thank you very much. Let me start by also congratulating David and his colleagues, and also indeed the students who are organizing all of this. Congratulations. This is an excellent gathering. This is May, and May in the LSC. Even from my old days, I can tell you and David, we were here at the same time. May was always a very tough time, because that's exams time. I don't know if they've changed it, but I rather doubt it. So congratulations for being able to put this together on this occasion. Just to add briefly that what David has said himself and his colleagues in the book, excellent book in terms of the data provided for many of the issues that were discussed. The element of tension which you referred to at the very beginning, tension between producing local or regional, I think is real. We can't pretend that it's not there. However, as David correctly said, this tension does not need to be there. If everybody is producing cocoa, for example, and exporting to Belgium and Switzerland to process into chocolates, of course you can find a bit of that trade being very little, because you don't want to export cocoa from Ivory Coast to Burkina Faso, or wherever it is serves at, or Ghana, but they both producing the same thing. However, when they move to adding value to the cocoa, one person can specialize in producing the cocoa powder, being able to be the one to supply it. Another one is adding value and transforming the raw material, raw cocoa, into products that they can exchange. Some, I understand, use in the cosmetic industry, they can do that. Another one can specialize in the food aspect of it. That is how you generate trade in this type of situation of competing primary commodity dependence. I want to give you one example from what happened with the COVID-19. What we found at the WTO, as we did all the work last 2 years, was that Pfizer's vaccine was made up, if you like, of about 280 small components. These 280 components came from 86 different suppliers from across 19 countries. Now, if Africa is able to do that type, then there does not need to be tension. Somebody can produce one but few elements within this particular final product. Another one specializes in a different one. If you look at Johnson & Johnson, 180 components from 67 suppliers in 12 different countries. People don't realize that the cars we drive, each one of those, sometimes 2,000 parts. And these are manufactured in bits and places. And ultimately, people specialize. So a country that can specialize in producing one aspect of whatever it is that is meant for the final product can actually be a major destination for FDI. So you are right, they need to be able to integrate all of these production processes in such a way that they complement each other, rather than the raw material that they send into other places for final processing. Let me pause there.
So what I hear you both saying is that one way to try to overcome this tension, first conceptually, is to stop thinking about trade in final goods and think about trade in the inputs that are used to make the final goods. But since my job here is to facilitate discussion, I'm going to just push back a little bit and just ask whether that doesn't just sort of restate the problem, because somebody has to coordinate that, who is producing which input, and some inputs have more value added than others, and everybody might be each country might be the one that wants to produce that particular input. So I'm just wondering, who coordinates which countries are participating in the value chains producing which part?
Eventually, that has to be the market. There are firms and producers different places of the market. We look to see what makes sense for them. They're going to source whatever from which country and so on. I think where governments need to come in, because I think this is where your question is also pointing, is to make sure that the rules are clear and transparent. Because if I'm a producer, I want to know that if I'm trying to source, if I'm sitting, say, in Ghana, and I want to source something from Kenya, that I know that the rules are clear. I know exactly the tariff that my Kenyan importer needs to pay, and so on and so forth. So this is where governments come in, and that's what they're pledged to do in the African continental free trade area. Let me also say, I think the response has been somewhat much later than what is actually happening in the market today. Governments are now playing catch up, because actually, if you look at the way production is going on the African continent, you see that this is already happening. it's not yet happening at the scale that we'd like to see that can transform economies. I don't think we've reached that tipping point yet, but it's happening, and the way that you look to see really what is happening is to look at the data, which is what we did with the data. The data tells us clearly that it is happening. But our governments need to get out of the way, in a sense. Make the rules clear. Reform the borders, because that is a huge problem, the bureaucracy at the borders, the trade facilitation aspect at the border. All this, and that of course makes trade more costly. It bites into the profits that flourish with it. It bites into how much people they could employ, and so on and so forth. So there's that knock-on effect. Let me also say that we've not really talked about services when we talk about goods, but the same thing can be said about services. You cannot really trade in goods without also trying to open up your services, the business services, and digitalization. All these new technologies are now making it possible to be able to deliver services without actually being in the country. So again, the point you were raising, Ken, I know that you're being provocative, also just shows that you no longer can try to do everything yourself, because you have all these possibilities that is generated in the market.
So the key to sort of economic diversification is different countries producing different parts of the value chain in different ways, and governments can help facilitate this with clear rules that allow actors to use their resources and to build these production chains. So that leads me then, if we sort of move our optic out of the continent and towards Geneva, where does the WTO come into this? What can the WTO do or not do to help facilitate this?
Thank you. I think the question of how people coordinate themselves, David said it very well. In fact, the market ultimately steps in, whether it's designed by the government or not. And to be honest with you, I would say that government's role should be minimized at this point as far as the African continent is concerned. The reason being that bureaucracy of government might just be a problem, ultimately. So I would say that the logic of the market, if Dangote today, who is Africa's richest businessman, is able to get material from different African countries, it's not going to go to any government. All that is needed is that the host government, not government of his country, but whichever country is going to be sourcing the material from, they need to facilitate trade. They need to have, I think one of the questions that comes up all the time is, how do we ensure that infrastructure, both soft infrastructure and hard infrastructure, is available for the purpose of making it easy to trade? If you do that, the logic of the market takes over very quickly. Yes, governments have a role, but it should be to a very large extent at the level of regulation, making sure they simplify the process. Otherwise, businesses are not going to be very keen in terms of jumping into the space.
So the audience has to suffer through the fact that there's these sort of trade nerds sitting on this. So let's bring things down a notch. In terms of, you both mentioned the facilitation of trade, and in fact there's now an agreement in the WTO, reached about 8 years ago or so, a WTO agreement on trade facilitation. Maybe can you both just say a word or two to the audience, to the non-trade nerds in the room, about what this agreement is and to what extent it helps or doesn't help overcome some of the challenges that we're talking about?
Okay. In 2013, the countries that are members of the WTO came together to say that yes, getting goods across the borders, being clear and transparent on what you can do with services, delivering services across borders between countries, and so that you need to have clearer rules on how you can do this. And also you need to be able to publish these things so that everybody can know. You can have a website website, for example, where you can say what your customs tariffs are, what is required to import to export, and so make everything clear and transparent. And as part of this, the poorer countries that are struggling with some of these processes at the borders were able to get the richer countries to say, well, you should help to pay for this. So that was also part of the agreement. And so each country was to come up with what are its specific needs, what are the investments that are needed to help open up the borders and so on. So basically that was, I think, in a nutshell what this agreement was about. I think I should say that rich countries have not quite delivered on some of those pledges, because that too is another story, an ongoing problem as regards who is paying for what and so on. So that has not worked out as well. But I think above all else, at least one thing that that agreement has done, which I think is of great value, is that you'll find in almost every country around the world that's a member of the WTO, you'll find that they each have some kind of coordinating structure in their capitals that is looking at what customs is doing, what the police are doing, what other security outfits in the country are doing, trying to coordinate to make sure that whatever they're doing, whether it's security, it is raising revenue through customs, that everybody is coordinated, everybody knows what they're doing, and that they're not hampering trade. So at least that kind of institutional setup is, you find in most countries. And I think that was a positive thing that came out of the agreement, because before, everybody was, sort of doing their own thing, properly coordinated and having the flow of trade.
Right. Let me just come in here to say that this is part of what we call supply side interventions, policies that are designed to facilitate trade. And as David said, this came into effect as a result of the experience that all the members obviously had seen. And I want to weave this into the work of the AFCFTA, because this is one of the areas where they can actually add value. We are working with them in terms of providing knowledge. We have the capacity, we have people who are really versed in these areas, and we are indeed giving that type of support. So this, I think, is part of the soft infrastructure that I referred to earlier on, to loosen the trading constraints on the continent. I'm going to give you a figure that you'll find that some of the businessmen, they've told us in the meetings we've had in the past, that in order to visit African countries, some of them need visas, they need 40 visas to be able to move around the continent, to have meetings. You know what that means. All of you, I'm sure, at some point, have sought visa in some of these embassies. It takes a long time. If a man like Dangote actually had to go through that, you can imagine what the small, unknown business person is likely to have faced. So that's one thing, but it's improving now. In the ECOWAS region in West Africa, you have one passport. You don't need a visa to go to the region, stretching all the way from Senegal to Nigeria. So that, I think, is a positive movement. You also find in some instances that, in fact, I'm going to quote you the figures. We've done a study at the WTO where we found that the obstacles that are faced by this country, by businessmen, you can quantify them to rise to the level of equivalent of 460% of tariff for African countries, African businessmen to export and trade with each other. Equivalent of about 460. Take everything into account. I don't mean it's tariff directly, but the high cost of transportation. Sometimes some goods you want to send, let's say from Nigeria to Cote d'Ivoire, you may have to send it first to Paris. and then they transport it back to that country because of the connectivity of flights. Maybe that's not the best example because you don't have flights between the two countries. That is one element. The other one is that for African businesses to trade, with other parts of the world, it's the equivalent of 210% tariff. So how are they going to be able to compete with other businesses in other countries that don't have these constraints? So it's a very, very big and very important constraint. And trade facilitation, easing business, how you can trade and all of that, customs, etc. It's a major way that this can be tackled.
Great. Thank you. So David, a big part of your book and a big part of your research is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which I know you've been following closely. What are the biggest impediments to actually not just agreeing it on paper, but agreeing it in reality, making it actually happen? What has to happen next?
Firstly, they need to finalize the negotiations. The areas that are still hanging, which are rules of origin, and on services, they need to complete the schedules of commitments on services. Actually, because I knew you were going to ask this question, this morning I called a contact of mine at the AFCFTA Secretariat, and he had some good news. He said that they've now negotiated the rules on automotive parts. That's because all the African countries want to have automotive industry.
That was my first question, by the way.
Well, yeah, but not to make everything in their country, in the countries, but they do want to be part of the value chains, and so that has been that has been one of the issues. But the good news is that they're done with that. The other sticky area is clothing and textile. Again, this is an easy industry to get into, and all countries want to be part of that value chain. So he was telling me that there's still some sticky issues, but it is looking positive that they will get agreement on that. Then the schedules of services commitments. He said that they've got 21 out of the current 48 or so signatories, so there's some way to go. So that's on the negotiating and completing the agreement, but it's looking positive. 5 years ago, when I was working on the agreement, I did not think that we will get to this stage right now. So I think in some ways, although I'd like to see things move faster, but you're dealing with so many governments. But I think it shows the commitment to the AFCFTA. The other problem I think that African countries have is infrastructure. Again, I think we say in the book that currently you have something like 60,000 kilometers of paved roads crisscrossing the continent. This is a continent of 30 million square kilometers. If you work it out, it is something like 2.5 kilometers per 1,000 square kilometers. 2.5 for road, and I think for rail it's similar, similar to that. Now the global average for road density is something like 23 kilometers per 1,000 square miles, and for rail it's something like 25 kilometers per 1,000 square miles. So you can see the gap. Africa has a long way to go to close that gap. The other aspect of this is there's been much progress. I myself have traveled, for example, along the Lagos Abidjan highway. I've seen that. I've been from Mombasa to the Ugandan border, Cairo down to Ethiopia, and so on. So the arteries and the trade routes are opening. But the governments who have done this have quickly got into debt. Because of this, a lot of this has been borrowed money, and at relatively higher rates than is normal. So you find that they're in this business circle, that they're trying to improve the infrastructure. They are making progress with improving the infrastructure. They are getting into net, and then they have to roll back. If you take a country like Ghana now, which has just been to the IMF, classic case of a government trying to go out, and then ironically, it is trade that can generate the revenues that could enable them to do these sorts of investments. So it's a vicious circle. Actually, that's why the concluding chapter that we're calling for a new trade deal for the African countries. That the partners need to look to see really the African countries, the late developing countries, what really they can do to support the kinds of reforms that they're trying to make, the progress with infrastructure, and so on and so forth.
So I'm going to ask Bright to come in on this, because one way David used the term vicious cycle twice, right, is the increased trade and investment among the members of the AFCFTA are supposed to generate the resources, but the ability for this agreement to be successful requires infrastructure that you need the resources for. So you need the resources in order for the agreement to be successful, which is to generate the resources. So is there a role for external actors, WTO or any other external actors, to help overcome this, break this vicious cycle and turn it into a more virtuous cycle?
Let me be modest and say the WTO does not have the money. What we do is the soft areas of support, as far as rules of trade are concerned, to support the technical assistance, capacity building, and so on. But two of the other places I've worked, the IMF, International Monetary Fund, indeed does have money. This cycle is actually vicious, I have to say. We need to turn it from viciousness to the virtuous, which you also hinted at. These partners, external partners, one of the things that they do, which sometimes we criticize, even as people who have worked in these places, is the terms under which these loans are given. Talking in terms of the interest charges, and things happen. There's one in Ukraine, and immediately you find there's inflation. People are increasing the federal rates in order to fight inflation. All of this therefore filters into the cost of borrowing for countries in Africa and elsewhere that have absolutely nothing to do with the issue or the problem as they were created. So partners do have a role. They need to look at these matters as part and parcel of the entire development agenda. It cannot just be simply that you pass on all of this to Ghana. Just obviously, if you look at it purely from the point of view of the financing entity. I also was working at the African Development Bank, as was mentioned on the board, and when we approve a lot of these loans, we always look out for viability of the projects. A government can simply come and say, well, I like this Marshall Bill. I want to build something like this in my capital. I will tell them no. Unless this building is going to generate resources, revenue, and so on, we're not just going to give you the loan. It doesn't make you popular, but these are some of the hard truths that we have to tell countries, some of them including presidents, by the way, and it's not very good, but this is what you do. I really do believe we need to solve this problem as being discussed internationally now, of how to revisit the issue of the debt profile of African countries, especially those that are tied to good infrastructure investment. I have to admit, though, that some of the borrowings have not been directed purely at projects that will be able to pay for themselves. And we always frown at that.
Thanks. Can I ask if anybody in the audience has any questions for David or Bright? Zach, yeah. Are you?
Should I yell?
Yeah, you don't need a microphone.
Thanks.
Okay, sorry. I was
Okay.
picking on you too much. I
You
apologize.
do pick on me a lot. I appreciate that.
Okay, I have a mic that works, and you don't. I'm just kidding. Hi, sirs. I appreciate you all being here. My name is Zach. I'm American. So a question I have is about something that I've been following in the American Congress, which is the African Growth and Opportunities Act, which is an agenda passed under the WTO GSP, which is for about 5,000 products in Africa. Congress has granted really generous trade relations with a couple contingencies, including, for instance, X country doesn't become a high-income country. But the analyses I've read of AGOA, this act that's set to be renewed or die or something in 2025, is that it's helped African development, but not as much as was expected. I'm curious to know your opinions on maybe trade with America, about the specific aspect of trade with America, and its role or lack of a role in playing development.
Great. I think this would also be a good time to mention Nebraska.
I love you.
Okay.
It was all staged.
It was on stage. America is the richest market, and that trade deal was meant to connect the African countries to what is actually the richest market. America opened up the trade, which was good, and actually in the book we said that this is the model to follow. AGOA is perfect. But what America did not do, America did not invest in Africa. In order to trade, you must invest and produce a generation. So what we show in the book very clearly, and this is not just America, the other big players as well, China, etc. They go for African raw materials. They go for the minerals and so on. All of them.
I think your mic's not.
Yeah. Okay. Is better now?
Yeah.
It's better. Yeah. So I think we show the data for the US, for the EU, for China, all of them. Doing exactly the same thing on investment. So the goods that the market opened up to the African countries were not being produced, and so that has been the problem. And we are calling for this diversification of investment so that goods could be produced. But at the same time, where investments were made, we were able to show that countries did take advantage of AGOA. So Gap, for example, opened up a clothing factory in Ethiopia to produce jeans and so on, and that was exported to the US. So it just underscores that you cannot just open up the market, you need to also invest. I think that message is getting through, through the Congress, all the different initiatives that the US has, including also the African diaspora in the US that now set up a council to look to see Africans in the US who want to invest. They're working on it. So it's work in progress. But we do hold up AGOA as the model. And we contrast that with the EU, we contrast that with the UK, we contrast that with the Chinese. On China, I'm not a China basher. We do have Kulani and looking at you because Kulani did a lot of that research. We are surprised to see there is actually no framework, no solid policy framework on trade. I'm sure that doesn't go down well in Nebraska.
Yeah.
Right, the programs like AGOA are bilateral programs. They're not from the WTO, so you might want to pass on this, but if you have anything to add, do you want to add anything?
David discovered it quite well. Investment is key to a lot of this. I, as a person, I have to confess the issue when things are couched as aid, I kind of cringe. It's not my favorite. Investment would certainly be able to make AGOA to work in the way that it was designed originally to work. But I also would say that Africa should not wait for anybody to come and bring that investment as if it were doing it a favor. Africa needs to provide the environment, and once that environment is right, capital will flow in that direction. If it comes by way of some of the things we've heard in the past, by way of aid, then it becomes a little bit of a soft, it's doing you a favor rather than, no. this has got to be packaged as a business proposal. There must be a value proposal that is worth investing in. That way, the discipline will be there for those who are receiving it to be used because you know you're going to generate profit in order to be able to merit this type of investment. If it's not, it's going to just, water that is thrown on the body of a duck, and it's just going to flow. So I think that investment aspect, and for African countries to help make the environment favorable for that purpose.
I think so far my friend Brighton and I have been agreeing on just about everything you've been saying. But here, we actually looked at this investment issue in some detail to see what the pattern and the trends are. Investment is going into the places that one would say is not at all favorable. Even war-torn situations, you see the investment going into minerals in those sorts of places. So that makes us think that really the interest is to get those commodities to extract those inputs that are needed, despite the risk, despite how difficult the situation will be. But we find that capital is going into those places. This is at least what the data is. I don't want to see countries tonight, but it's very clear. But at the same time, I agree with Bright on the other side of the argument that the African countries need to reform to make to be attractive for investment and so on. But it just makes you wonder, that capital is still going into places that are not at all attractive. So that is...
Yeah, no, I agree with you. One small point I want to make is that in those sectors, minerals, rare earth, those sort of things, the return is high. The risk is there, but the returns are even higher, which is the reason they're going there. But if you're looking at agriculture and things of that type, the risk is not so high, and I think what we say is make it sufficiently. The reason they are not going there is because they don't want to do that particular heavy lifting in an area that is critical for development. Anyway, we are not disagreeing. The 3 tons bar, it's always where we resolve these matters. I'm told 3 tons is still in existence. So
just go to can the mic go there, and then we'll go to that side of the room, and then we'll come back. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kitty. I'm really enjoying this conversation. Thank you so much to David and Bright and to you for facilitating this. My question really is about what is stopping our African leaders from negotiating.
I don't think your mic is picking up.
Oh.
Sorry.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I was just saying, my question is, what is stopping our African leaders from making better negotiations? Because, we have the resources, and as you said, David, our internal trade is a lot better. It's more diverse than what we do externally out of the continent. So what is really tying our leaders down to accepting these bad deals, and why aren't they doing better? How can they actually do better to get better deals?
I think this is a really very good question. We do say some bold things in the concluding section of the book on all this. One of them is that there needs to be more strategic thinking and approach to these sorts of issues. We're making progress, but I would say that the urgency, the intentionality, the strategic drive and push could be better. And we do say that one of the ways this could be achieved is for the African countries really to try to negotiate as one. The economies are too small to matter. And I'm not sure Brian could elaborate on this. The negotiating teams are small, not well resourced. right, knows very well the situation of the embassies in Geneva. In fact, whilst we were waiting, we were talking then, we were saying that there are only 2 fully fledged African ambassadors to the here, South Africa and Nigeria. All the others, sort of running after all the different other organizations that they have to cover. So the governments need to be much more strategic, much more intentional. Also need to ensure that they're better armed with analysis, with data, and so on. I've observed, for example, when the Indians are negotiating, it's really very impressive to see how much analysis has gone into some of the proposals that are putting through. I mean, of course, somebody said to me the other day, I made the same point, that Indians are always a problem and causing a problem at the WTO. So, but I think
I'm not going to comment on that.
yeah, but I think and we say all these things in the book, actually. And for me, I in particular, I wanted to be sure that these issues are out there, so that our leaders, policy leaders, could pick on that. And we gave the example of India actually in the book. So I think these are some of the ways that the countries could respond. There needs to be more intentionality, a much more strategic push, I would say.
Yeah, white shirt. Yeah.
Sorry, I have the mic. Can I ask the question?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. My name is Asina. I'm from Ghana. I appreciate you, David and Brad, for sharing your in-depth knowledge. I have a two-tiered question. The first one is, given Ghana and its current IMF loan acquisition, I want to know what your objective thoughts are and where it places our future, especially given that a few months back we had the year of return and that really drove capital up. So I would like to hear what your thoughts are on the IMF loan acquisition, as well as China's more like influx across Africa with given loans and what that means for the future of the continent. Thank you.
Right, why don't you take that?
That's a very hard one.
That's why I'm giving it to you.
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think that loans of this type are not in themselves bad. If you take these loans and utilize them for economic activities or infrastructure that will actually stimulate economic activities, that I think is good investment. So we should not knock that part. The part where in the past, many countries got it wrong was borrowing or taking these loans without doing what we can call a proper project analysis and assessment, where you will do it. The president might be from a particular place and feels that this road must go through there. But the economists around him or her should be able to say, Mr. President, or whatever, this is not the best use of this particular resource. Since it's from the IMF, I know this particular one is to try to sort out the current economic. It's not to build infrastructure, it's to restore the macroeconomic stability that has fallen away from Ghana. Inflation is very high now. The exchange rate, as you know very well, is depreciated, following from the sort of balance of payments difficulties that have arisen. One thing I have to say about these loans is that really because Ghana started producing oil around 2008, I was the main resource person that the President Kufuor and others brought to come and speak to Ghana on how to avoid the mistakes that Nigeria made with its oil. Unfortunately, it does not appear that we succeeded very well in avoiding those types of mistakes. So I will not go further in that. Just with respect to the thing about China, I think that African countries need to be quite clear when they negotiate these loans. The only difference that people have pointed to in the case of Chinese loans is that you can actually see something on the ground. You can see a road, you can see a rail, something and things like that. in the past, a lot of the monies were given for things that you can't quite see. They will tell you it's budget support or things like that, which they then use to do things that you cannot quite point to. So the difference with the Chinese is that they came in with that type of, they just started in and they want to show a good example. I don't know how it will look like down the road. I think the rigor in analyzing projects and loan proposals is where we need to do better. And this is what I would say on this point, to propose.
Great, thank you. Yeah, the white. Can you give the mic to? Yes.
Hi, thanks for the talk today. My name is Luke Mahinga. For the past 4 years, I've worked in international development, across Africa, waste management, and policy advisory for circular economy policy reforms across different countries in the region. In terms of my work and what I've seen in terms of governments, they have like a rather defensive strategy in terms of generating revenue, whether it's through increasing taxes on citizens or acquiring loans, as we've mentioned and discussed in this talk. How can the government shift its perspective from a defensive strategy to more of an offensive strategy by encouraging local entrepreneurship, not just for inter-trade within Africa, but also trade from Africa to countries across the world? Thank you.
Yeah, I was trying to sort of process what you mean by defensive strategy, but I guess what you mean is that investors, business people are finding difficulties in sort of getting the businesses on the ground and all that kind of that kind of thing. That is something that needs to be addressed. I think quite rightly, when we were talking about investment a moment ago, highlight this issue. For some countries, it is getting better. The poster child for this days is Rwanda, where I'm told that you can open a business in an hour, less than an hour. You can, basically do most of it online and get your documents signed and get going. So I think it is getting better. More and more, but it is a challenge in some places. Hopefully also, one of the virtues of having a free trade agreement where all countries have signed up to commitments that they are going to take, such as you have in the AFCFTA, is that across the board, you would have more or less the same standards on these sorts of in these sorts of areas. But it is work in progress. I have said, I've criticized on the other side that some partners are work in progress on the African side as well. Certainly there are some areas where improvements can be made.
So I'll come back to this side of the room.
Can you with the microphone?
Thank you very much for a very wonderful talk and discussion. The challenge with most of these talks, especially David Lee or Dale to this, is that I tend to feel they are more like high-level discussions, really. And when you talk of a new trade agreement, it sounds really very brilliant idea. The question now comes, how about the young entrepreneurs that are down there in our countries? How can they position themselves to take advantage of this? Is there any practical advice you could offer to them? Thank you.
What advice I can offer, this is what it's all about, really, opening up the market. As an entrepreneur, you want to make sure that the market you're operating in, that the rules are predictable, you are able to get things across the border if you're exporting across the border. If you're in services, you're able to move around. You heard the point about passports and visas and so on. So, and all of these things, these reforms through the AFCFTA and the WTO trade facilitation agreement we talked about, they're all trying to go in that direction. So, as an entrepreneur, what I would say is take advantage of the market as best as you can. The other aspect, of course, of that market is that it is a growing market. You know, the population is now 1 billion and growing. The continental GDP is 3.5 trillion when you add everything together, and that is quite substantial. It tells you that the potential and the purchasing power in that economy, with the output, is quite substantial. And you can do business, you can get things done in that kind of setting. Again, this is the market in aggregate. If you're an entrepreneur, you can then scale up and benefit from scale economies and so on. And we're seeing this happen with a number of small, one can give some examples either from the tech sector, pharmaceuticals were mentioned earlier. We're beginning to see some of these entrepreneurs taking advantage and being able to scale up, but it's beginning to show in the data as well, what is tricky. But we do, of course, need to scale up all of this up. We do continue with reforms. That's an ongoing process. It's never really comes to an end as such, but you need to keep pushing. And the entrepreneurs themselves are part of the African political economy. They have a stake, and they too need to be part of the voice that can drive these reforms.
Let me add there that one big area is digital trade. Digital trade is growing in leaps and bounds, actually, compared to traditional sources. So somebody can stay in their basement in any of these countries and just be doing trade online or offering services. The future of trade, as we say frequently, is digital, is green, and indeed, e-commerce, which we are doing joint statement initiatives, e-commerce is really coming into its own. And one of the ways that we are trying to enhance and open this up is by having proper rules to guide this thing, data security, to be able to ensure that people's details are kept. And then, of course, the issues of customs revenue that we are negotiating that now is very difficult. Customs duty that are going to be forgone if you're just going to sit in your house, do trade, and government doesn't see any percentage coming to them by way of tax or customs. So these things are being negotiated even as we speak. We have about 89 countries that are under the GSI for e-commerce at the moment. Only 7 of these are African, and we are pushing more and more of them to get into the negotiating space. As David said earlier, their voice needs to be heard in this so they can be part of those making the rules. So one thing we also found was that women who suffer a disadvantage in trade, they are doing a lot better, especially during the COVID period when everything went into digital operations. Women were doing brisk business because nobody was looking, is it a man, is it a woman, they were simply doing it. And young people have overtaken everybody with all the things with the digital, tech money and so on and so forth. Yes.
Great, thanks. In the back? Yes. Can you bring the mic to the back, please? Right there. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Hi, yeah. It's actually really amazing everything I've heard today. And in my head, I'm thinking, is this not a conclusion of saying that that our community, we need to be more educated in our own resources, in how to our own rights? Because if all these entrepreneurs, all these farmers, or people educated are all smart enough to use these devices, are not aware of how to use them or know what they can say to their customers or to their buyers, So I'm thinking, how we have African Day celebration, have we ever thought of having a day where in Africa also we have a day where people actually contribute to the day, Red Nose Day? like have a day where we have a day where we maybe an African clothes as well back home, and we donate some money to our school, to our churches, or to our workplace, and we put this money together to the government to actually redistribute back to us again, to help us, to educate us in being aware of all of this information, because what's the whole point of having this information when you're not aware of it? So, you know, like improving the education system to also, you know.
No, I mean, certainly, I think there's scope, including for the diaspora. By the way, that's something that we speak to in the book. In the case of the UK, we're saying that about 6.5 billion is what the figure we came up with that the diaspora sends back to the continent. And a significant part of that goes into the cost of just doing that. And we were saying that the UK government could look into bringing that down as there are ways of doing that. But I think the scope actually for the diaspora to be involved in investments, projects, as you be saying.
So I'm going to start to wrap up here. I mean, I really enjoyed this conversation because one of the things that it's brought home is that it's not just about trade. I mean, the theme tonight is how Africa trades, and we're talking, that's sort of our entry point, but the trade agreement is just a step along the way. We've talked about investment, we've talked about debt, we've talked about a multitude of other things that have to happen within countries and between countries to make trade successful. And as someone who studies sort of international political economy and development, I think it's very useful that we always remember that trade is part of a bigger complex of sets of issues. But back on the issue of trade, I'm going to just, on the closing note, no, I'm sorry, I've given instructions as to when we need to be done up here. So I'm not ignoring the people who got their hands up. Well, I guess I am, but I'm doing it not by choice. Is that David and his colleagues have written an exceptionally interesting, insightful, and really timely book on African trade. And I would encourage everybody to pick up a copy. It's also through the LSE Press. It's downloadable for free. To read it, think about it, talk about it. And I'm glad to be here tonight. I look forward to the rest of the Ubuntu Cafe. But at this point, what I'd like to do is both thank David and Bright for being up here and ask you all to please join me in thanking them and congratulating David and his co-authors on this excellent book.
I wanted to say that we want to send Bright back to Geneva with some homework. And basically, he's the Chief of Staff and Principal Advisor to the DG. And we think that there is scope for the DG to use an office more as a fully pulpit to respond to some of the issues that have been raised here. I think to the urgency to get the AFCFTA done. I think we know the DG does not have power as such, but she does have that fully pulpit. I think she can use that. I think also the global trade is changing in a way that is moving to becoming greener with all sorts of implications. So I think right now say there's scope for some kind of an international task force, maybe like what we saw for the Aid for Trade initiative, that could look at how the WTO could be reformed, and in that process, how the African countries could be positioned better in the WTO. So that's the homework I'd like Brian to take back to.
Well, let me just say, because if you give me a homework, this is the LSE, they give you a homework, they expect you to perform. So let me just tell you, we are doing a lot of this work already. I have to say that you correctly observed the DG does not have anything to do with the AFCFTA. WTO is totally separate from that. But we've given a lot of support to them in the work that they are doing. And we intend to continue with this. DG is not what you use bully. She's come to the LSE to receive an honorary doctorate not so long ago. You saw her. She's not a bully type, but she persuades very well. And the persuasion and her persuasiveness led us to achieve excellent results last June, the MC12 that we had, after more than 20 years of meetings without any agreement. So thank you very much. We'll take your message back.
I'd just like to wrap this up with to give some tokens to say thanks for various people who helped us with the book. It should only take a couple of minutes. Yeah. Yes.